My entitled tech millionaire neighbor illegally built a $50,000 luxury swimming pool on my property while I was deployed overseas, so I legally filled it with concrete during his massive 4th of July pool party. I own a beautiful 2-acre piece of land in a quiet neighborhood, but I am in the military and had to leave for a 9-month deployment. While I was gone, a wealthy, arrogant tech bro bought the house next door. He wanted a massive infinity pool with a hot tub, but his backyard was way too small to fit the design. Instead of scaling down his plans, he just ordered the construction crew to build it 15 feet over the property line directly onto my land. He figured since my house was empty, I wouldn't notice or care. When I finally came home from my deployment, I walked into my backyard and found this massive glowing blue pool sitting right in the middle of my property. I calmly walked over and confronted him. He just laughed in my face, took a sip of his expensive craft beer, and told me to take $5,000 and shut up. He said he had more money than I would ever see in my lifetime, and if I tried to sue him, he would bury me in legal fees. I didn't yell or argue. I just called the city planning office and hired a licensed surveyor to conduct an official boundary assessment. The survey proved, without a doubt, that 80% of his new pool was illegally built on my property. I took the paperwork straight to a judge who was absolutely furious at the neighbor's arrogance. The judge issued a strict court order, giving my neighbor exactly 30 days to demolish the pool and restore my land to its original condition. My neighbor completely ignored the court order, thinking he was above the law, but because he missed the legal deadline, the judge officially transferred ownership of the encroaching structure to me and granted me the legal right to destroy it at his expense. I didn't just want to demolish it quietly. I waited exactly 2 weeks until he was hosting a massive 4th of July luxury pool party with over 50 guests. Right as the party peaked, 3 massive industrial cement trucks rolled up my driveway, followed by 2 local sheriffs. My neighbor ran over screaming and threatening to kill me, but the sheriffs physically restrained him and showed him the final court order. His guests stood around in absolute shock, holding their drinks as my construction crew completely drained the water and poured tons of rapid setting concrete directly into his $50,000 infinity pool. We filled it all the way to the brim and smoothed it out perfectly. My neighbor dropped to his knees and literally started crying as his luxury pool was turned into a massive gray slab. To make it even better, the court placed a mandatory lien on his house, forcing him to pay the $20,000 bill for the concrete trucks. I recently bought some yellow spray paint and painted parking lines over the slab. I now use his ruined dream pool to park my old pickup truck. My entitled aunt forced me to take a DNA test right after my grandfather's funeral to prove I wasn't his real grandson, so she could steal my inheritance. But her malicious plan backfired so terribly that it destroyed her entire life. My grandfather was a wealthy real estate developer, and he practically raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 10. We were incredibly close, and when he passed away, he left 70% of his massive estate to me. My Aunt Linda was furious. She had spent her entire life blowing through his money and expected to inherit everything. During the official reading of the will, Linda suddenly stood up and slammed her hands on the table. She brought her own sleazy lawyer and loudly accused my late mother of having an affair. She told the entire family that I was an illegitimate child and had absolutely no right to the family fortune. She illegally halted the distribution of the assets and demanded a court-ordered DNA test to prove my lineage. I knew she was lying, but I agreed to take the swab just to shut her up. However, the judge ruled that in order to establish a proper genetic baseline, Linda had to submit her DNA as well. She proudly agreed, thinking she had already won. 2 weeks later, we all gathered back in the lawyer's office to open the sealed medical results. The lawyer read the paperwork and looked completely shocked. He cleared his throat and announced that I was a 99.9% biological match to my grandfather. Linda rolled her eyes and demanded he read her results next. The lawyer looked her dead in the eye and stated that she shared 0 DNA with my grandfather. The entire room gasped. It turned out my grandmother had a secret affair 40 years ago, and Linda was the actual illegitimate child. Linda started screaming and throwing things, claiming the test was rigged, but the results were legally binding. The best part is that my grandfather's will had a very strict ironclad clause that stated the inheritance could only be distributed to his direct biological descendants. Linda had specifically forced the lawyer to activate that exact clause to get rid of me. By demanding the DNA test, she accidentally proved she wasn't a biological descendant and permanently legally disinherited herself from millions of dollars. She lost her house because she was relying on the inheritance to pay off her massive credit card debt, and her husband divorced her out of pure embarrassment. I took my millions, bought a beautiful house on the beach, and never spoke to her again. My entitled coworker kept stealing my expensive homemade lunches from the office fridge, so I laced my food with pure ghost pepper extract and watched him cry in front of the entire company. I work in a busy corporate office, and I love cooking gourmet meals for myself. For 3 straight weeks, my lunch would magically disappear from the break room fridge. I complained to HR, but they told me they couldn't put cameras in the kitchen, and I just needed to label my food better. My name was already written in huge black marker on every single container, so I knew exactly who was doing it. It was the arrogant senior sales manager named Greg, who always bragged about his 6-figure salary. Since HR wouldn't help, I decided to handle it myself. I made my famous spicy chicken wings, but this time I soaked them in a concentrated ghost pepper hot sauce that is literally used with a severe health warning. I placed the container in the fridge with my name on it and went back to my desk. 2 hours later, I heard a horrific screaming sound coming from the break room. Half the office ran in to see Greg on the floor, sweating profusely and chugging a gallon of milk. His face was entirely purple, and he was gasping for air. The empty container with my name clearly written on it was sitting right next to him. Our boss walked in and asked what was happening. Greg tried to accuse me of trying to poison him, but our boss just looked at the empty container and asked why he was eating my personal lunch. Greg was immediately fired for stealing, and I never lost a lunch again. My entitled cousin kicked me out of her bridal party exactly 2 weeks before her wedding because I refused to dye my natural red hair blonde to match her aesthetic. So I took back the wedding gift I bought her, which happened to be her $5,000 dream honeymoon flights. We had grown up together, and I honestly thought we were close. But the second she got a ring on her finger, she turned into a complete monster. She dictated exactly what we could eat for 6 months so we would fit into the dresses she picked out. Went along with all of it to keep the peace. But 2 weeks before the big day, she sent a group text to all the bridesmaids demanding we all dye our hair a specific shade of platinum blonde so she would stand out more in the photos. I have very long, naturally red hair that took me years to grow out, and bleaching it would completely destroy it. I texted her privately and politely told her I would style it exactly how she wanted, but I wasn't going to bleach it. She completely lost her mind. She called me selfish, said I was trying to ruin her big day, and officially kicked me out of the wedding. She told me I wasn't even invited as a guest anymore. I didn't argue. I just said okay and hung up. What she didn't realize was that as a surprise wedding gift, my parents and I had pooled our money to secretly pay for her entire honeymoon flights to Hawaii. The tickets were completely non-refundable, but they were booked under my credit card and my name as the account holder. Since I was no longer invited to the wedding, I decided I didn't need to give her a wedding gift. I called the airline, canceled the flights, and accepted a full flight credit to my personal account. The wedding day came and went. I stayed home and watched movies. The very next morning, my phone started blowing up with panicked text messages from my cousin. She and her new husband were at the airport check-in desk, and the agent told them their reservation didn't exist. She demanded to know what happened to the flights. I texted her back a screenshot of the cancellation confirmation and told her that since I was kicked out of the wedding, I assumed she wouldn't want a gift from someone who ruined her aesthetic. She had a complete meltdown in the middle of the terminal because it was a last-minute same-day flight booking. The prices were triple what I had originally paid. They couldn't afford the new tickets and had to take an Uber back to their apartment and spend their honeymoon sitting on their living room couch. My parents completely supported my decision, and now my cousin refuses to speak to any of us, which honestly feels like a second gift. My insane HOA president illegally towed my vintage car from my own driveway, so I legally bought the private road in front of her house and charged her a $50 daily toll just to leave her driveway. I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood that was unfortunately run by a terrifying homeowners association president named Brenda. Brenda was a bored nightmare who patrolled the streets with a ruler measuring grass length and handing out massive fines for the wrong shade of curtains. I mostly ignored her until I finally bought my dream car, which was a beautifully restored classic Mustang. I parked it legally in my own driveway, but Brenda absolutely hated it because she claimed loud muscle cars lowered the property value of her pristine neighborhood. She left threatening notes on my windshield every single day, demanding I hide it in a garage, but I completely ignored her. One Friday, I came home from a business trip and my driveway was completely empty. I panicked and immediately checked my security cameras. The footage clearly showed Brenda directing a shady tow truck driver to hook up my vintage Mustang and drag it away. I marched over to her house and she stood on her porch with a smug smile claiming my car violated a special aesthetic clause and she had it impounded at a lot that charged $200 a day. She thought I would break down and beg her to release it. Instead, I called my lawyer and we started digging into the HOA public financial records. It turned out Brenda was completely incompetent and had actually forgotten to pay the county property taxes on the neighborhood's private access roads for the last 5 years. The city had quietly put the main road leading directly to Brenda's cul-de-sac up for public tax auction. I didn't say a single word to her. I went straight to the county courthouse and bought the road for just $4,000. I was now the sole legal private owner of the street directly in front of her house. I immediately hired a construction crew to install a heavy-duty commercial toll gate right across the entrance of her street. I programmed the electronic toll to charge exactly $50 per entry and exit. The next morning, Brenda tried to leave for her weekly hair appointment, but her luxury SUV was completely blocked by my bright yellow gate. She got out of her car screaming and actually tried to physically break the mechanical arm. I casually walked out, holding my official property deeds and a cup of coffee. She immediately called the police, demanding I be arrested for holding her hostage. And 2 officers arrived, but after reviewing my stamped county documents, they smiled and told Brenda the road was private property, and she either had to pay the toll or walk. She completely lost her mind crying on the sidewalk while all her neighbors watched in pure embarrassment. To make things worse, my lawyer sued her for grand theft auto for illegally towing my car. Since she used unauthorized HOA funds to pay the tow truck, the entire neighborhood voted to instantly strip her of her presidency. She couldn't afford the constant toll fees or the massive legal settlement, so she was forced to sell her house at a massive loss and move away. My mother-in-law secretly canceled my $15,000 wedding catering 1 week before my wedding just so she could force us to hire her best friend's cheap taco truck. My husband and I had spent 2 entire years saving up for our dream wedding at a beautiful vineyard. We hired an award-winning Italian catering company and already paid them in full. My mother-in-law hated this because she wanted to control every single aspect of our wedding. She constantly complained that we were wasting money and told everyone she could have done it better. Her best friend Susan owned a struggling food truck that had terrible reviews online. My mother-in-law demanded we hire Susan to support her business, but I politely refused. I thought that was the end of it. But last Monday, I got an automated email from the Italian catering company confirming that my cancellation request had been processed and a partial refund was being mailed to my mother-in-law's home address. My blood ran completely cold. I called the caterer immediately and they told me a woman claiming to be the bride called and canceled the entire order, citing a sudden family emergency. They said the woman answered all my security questions perfectly. I realized my mother-in-law had stolen the wedding binder from my kitchen counter, which had all my vendor contracts and passwords inside. I didn't call my husband and I didn't scream at her. I went into total survival mode. I called the caterer back, explained the fraud, and begged them to reinstate the order. Thankfully, they had a cancellation cancellation window and agreed to show up as originally planned. But I wasn't going to let my mother-in-law get away with this. I knew she had already hired Susan's food truck to show up at the venue and save the day when the Italian food mysteriously didn't arrive. So I called the county health department. I anonymously reported Susan's food truck for operating without a valid commercial permit and storing raw meat at dangerous temperatures. On the day of my wedding, everything was perfect. We had our beautiful ceremony and everyone moved to the reception tent. Right on cue, Susan's dirty food truck rolled up to the venue driveway. My mother-in-law stood up grabbing the microphone from the DJ. She put on a fake crying voice and announced to all 150 guests that my caterer had horribly bailed on us, but she heroically stepped in to provide food so the wedding wasn't ruined. Everyone started clapping for her. She looked at me with the most evil, smug smile I have ever seen. But before anyone could walk over to the truck, 2 county health inspector vehicles pulled up with their lights flashing. They walked right up to Susan and shut her entire operation down on the spot for health code violations. My mother-in-law started screaming at the inspectors in front of the entire family. While she was throwing her massive tantrum, the double doors to the vineyard kitchen swung open. A team of professional waiters walked out carrying trays of the most beautiful Italian food you have ever seen. The guests were completely confused. I calmly walked up to the DJ booth, took the microphone, and thanked the Italian caterers for ignoring the fraudulent cancellation call my mother-in-law made last week. I even held up the printed email receipt for everyone to see. The silence in the room was absolute. My husband looked at his mother in complete disgust and told her to pack her things and leave immediately. She tried to cry and play the victim, but not a single person defended her. She was escorted off the property by security. My husband and I went completely no contact with her the next morning. I heard she is now being sued by Susan for the cost of the wasted food, and she is entirely isolated from the rest of her family. My fiancé proposed to me in front of my entire family with what he claimed was his great-grandmother's antique diamond ring and told everyone it was worth over $20,000. I was completely in shock and wore it proudly for 2 months. He always told me to be extremely careful with it because it was a priceless family heirloom. Last week, I noticed the main stone was getting slightly cloudy, so I took it to a professional jeweler just to get it cleaned and appraised for insurance. The jeweler took one look at it under his microscope and gave me a sad smile. He told me the ring was made of cheap brass and the stone was cubic zirconia. He said the entire thing was worth maybe $30 and looked like it came from Amazon. I was confused and thought maybe my fiancé got scammed by a fake antique dealer. I drove home and went into his home office to look for the original certification papers he claimed to have in his desk. I didn't find any papers, but I did find a receipt from a local luxury jewelry store. It was a resizing receipt for an authentic vintage diamond ring, but the name on the receipt was not mine. It was the name of his ex-girlfriend, Sarah. My stomach dropped. I opened his laptop and searched his messages. He had been secretly seeing his ex for 6 months, and he actually gave her the real family heirloom ring because she was 3 months pregnant with his child. He bought me a cheap fake off the internet just to keep me quiet and maintain his image as the perfect guy while he figured out how to leave me. I didn't cry, and I didn't confront him. I packed all of my things while he was at work. Then I took his incredibly expensive $10,000 custom gaming PC setup and his giant flat screen TV and sold them to a pawn shop for $3,000 cash. I left the $30 fake ring on his empty desk with the pawn shop receipt and a note that said, "I used your gaming money to insure the real diamond." Then I took screenshots of his messages with his pregnant ex and sent them to his deeply religious parents and our entire wedding guest list. I blocked his number and used the $3,000 to book a solo vacation to Mexico. I heard his parents completely disowned him, and his ex dumped him when she realized he had no money left to support her.